Alright guys, welcome back to part 5 of my platformer series. Today we're going to be looking at doing one-directional platforms. What I mean by that is something that you can stand on, but that you can jump up through from underneath or from the side, and also press a button to drop down below, as opposed to just our regular walls. It is a subject I've covered before in a different video, but I'm going to be doing it again for the new platformer series, and I'm going to be showing you a totally different new method of doing it. Which I think is a lot better and more effective than the version that was shown in my previous video. And so hopefully you'll learn a lot and get a lot out of it. Alright, so the first thing I'm going to do is just put together a new sprite for our one-directional platform. I'm going to call it SBR_platform sprite. I'm just going to make this very similar to our current wall, but make it a bit thinner, just so that we can distinguish it, and just make it like a grey colour, as opposed to, well, let me get a different one from that so you can kind of see it. Yeah, that'll do. Just so it's distinguished from the blank walls that we already have. Take that, and I'm going to place the origin now. Normally, with most sprites, I would put the origin in the center with this button, but I'm going to have it, while centered on the x-coordinate, for the y-coordinate, I'm just going to make the y-coordinate of the origin 0. And that's just to make something we do later a little bit easier, and hopefully you'll be able to click on to how that helps us in a bit. Okay, so now that we've made our sprite, we just need to make our object. So I'm going to go into Objects, right-click, Insert Object, obj_platform, set the sprite accordingly to SBR_platform, and here where it says Parent, I'm going to click this and make this object a child of obj_wall. That means it will inherit any code that is performed by or that happens to obj_wall. So if I place a couple of these around the level now, obj_platform, just so we have something to actually test platform, that'll do. And if we run the game, you will find that these act exactly as if they were regular walls, so that you can run into them, collide with them, just like regular walls. This isn't what we want though. We want to be able to jump up through the platforms, so that wherever we're below them, we can jump through them, and we only want to land on them when we're above them. So the logic we're going to use to actually create this effect is we're going to make it so that whenever we're below the platform, there is no collision box. We're just going to completely remove any collision box from the platform, so that when our object is doing its regular collision code and looking for a wall to collide with, it won't find one because it won't find any collision box there at all, even though the object itself is still set up to collide with the player because it's inheriting from obj_wall. But whenever we're above the platform, we're going to turn that collision box back on so that it acts like a regular wall and we can land on it just like this. And then we're also going to make it, just as an added bonus, that whenever you're pressing the down key, we also turn off the hitbox, so that then you fall through the platform, and then once you've fallen through the platform even by 1 pixel, you're below the platform now, and the collision box is turned off, and you'll be able to drop through the platform really seamlessly and easily without getting stuck or anything like that. So that's what we're going to do. Okay, so that means our first step is to go into obj_platform, go to Add Event, Create, and drag in an execute code action, and the first piece of code we're going to execute is simply sprite _index equals -1. Now all that does is completely removes the sprite from the object. We could always just have set sprite here to be no sprite, but then that would make placing it around the room kind of difficult because we wouldn't have the sprite here that we're going to use. So we have that set up there just so it's easy for us to place the object around the room, but by default when the object is made, it's going to be set to -1, which means it's going to have absolutely no sprite. And because it has no sprite set up, it also has no collision box. Now, obviously, if we were to run the game, because there is no sprite set when these things are created, they would all be invisible, and you wouldn't be able to see the platforms. So how do we fix that? Well, all we do is we have the object draw a sprite in the draw event, as opposed to just doing the regular thing where it would draw itself by having its sprite set to SBR_platform. So in Events, hit Add Event, and select the Draw event, pick Draw, in Control, drag in an execute code box, and in here all I'm going to type is draw_sprite, so we're drawing a sprite to the screen. The name of the sprite we're going to use is SBR_platform. The sub-image, which means the frame of that sprite, because the sprite's being animated and all that, is just going to be 0, because the first one, it's only 1 anyway, it doesn't really matter. And the coordinates are just going to be x and y. So really it's like we've just sort of circumvented the normal method of an object drawing itself, and we're just having the object's code draw the sprite like manually instead of how it would automatically do it. So now that we have that, we should basically find at the moment, if we run the game, that we've basically got these platforms and you can just jump through them right now because they've got no sprite set up. The only reason they're drawing there and you can see them is because of our draw event that draws the sprite there. Otherwise, there's effectively no collision box. But because it's still a child of obj_wall, that code looking for a collision box is still there. So the moment that we turn the collision box on, you'll collide just like you would with any of these walls. So then how do we actually set it up to turn on when we want it to? So edit the object again, add event, this time the step event. So all we're going to be doing is checking whether or not the player is above or below the platform at any point in time. First of all, we're just going to do a safety check and make sure at this point in our game the player actually exists, in case you've got death code or whatever, and if you destroy the player object at any time, we don't want the game to crash because of these objects looking for the player and trying to work out where the player is if the player doesn't exist, So just going to do a quick safety check to make sure that the player exists at this particular moment in time, because as you know, this is a step event and it will happen every frame. That's the instance exists, not exist. And then if the player does exist, we're going to do another if, and we're going to say if obj_player.y plus obj_player.sprite, I'll explain this in a second, height over 2 is greater than y. So now think about that for a second. So if the y coordinate of the player, which remember the higher that is, the lower down the player is on the screen, plus, and remember our player's origin, so where this y coordinate is in the center of the player object, plus half of the sprite height of the player. So that puts this y coordinate as being the very, very bottom pixel of the player, so the player's foot, essentially, is greater than our current y coordinate, which, if you remember from our sprite, is the very top of this platform. That's checking whether or not we are completely above the platform. Like if we are 1 pixel into the platform, then this if statement would return false. What we're also going to do though is we're going to stick round on the start of this pile of stuff and close that bracket there. Now what round does is it just rounds a real number into an integer, so any number that has decimal points, because you'll notice our y coordinate with the gravity and stuff moves, it technically is a real number and not an integer, so that when you're falling you can be standing on the floor and technically the game sort of considers you almost half on the floor, like you could be at a y coordinate of 7.2 or something like that. Now to kind of make sure that this works out perfectly, and you can't like end up at like y of 15.6 and not quite be greater than, it can kind of mess up. So we're going to just round this number off to make sure that it's a whole number and it's the exact pixel that we're currently on. By rounding it, it should give us the pixel that we're being represented on the screen, and it should be pixel perfect. So if that's greater than y, but then we're going to add another condition in here as well. So I'm just going to wrap this in brackets, and I'm just going to put 2 lines here for, and what that means is or. Similar to how that can represent and, those 2 lines represent or. So if either this condition, which means we're above the platform perfectly, or obj_player.key_down mask index equal -1. So if we've also got the down arrow key, and we haven't set up a down arrow key yet because we've not needed one, but we'll do that in a second. But basically, so if we're above the platform, or for a condition we're going to set up in a minute, the downward arrow key is being pressed, so that would allow us to drop through. So assuming all of that condition is true, all we've done at the end here is set our mask index to be -1. Now what your mask is, you can set a mask, and that's your collision sprite at any point in time. And by setting it to -1, that doesn't, as you would think, set it to no collision mask at all, otherwise we wouldn't have had to bother with the sprite index -1 thing. It sets it to the default for whatever your sprite is, and now because our sprite is currently no sprite at all, it's -1, when we set our mask index to -1, it sets us to have no collision mask. So it keeps us having no collision mask as long as all that stuff is true. If it's not true, meaning all of that stuff is not true, else mask index equals SBR_platform, which will give us the platform sprite's collision mask instead of our object's default collision mask, which is no collision mask because no sprite. And that's really all you need for that. Now, in order to finish this method off and just make this thing work, all we need to do is just set up that down key in the player object, really. So I'm going to go into object player, and in the initialize variables section, I'm just going to put key_down equals 0. I know we didn't establish our other keys in here, but that's because no other object needed to check that these variables existed at any point, whereas this is being checked from a separate object, so we need to make sure that this this variable is established before the platform's step events can ever happen. So I'm just making sure that we've initialized this downward key as being 0 in our create event. And then in the step event, we can just make another one of these things for key down. Key down is just going to equal keyboard_check vk down. It's just the downward arrow key. That's all we're going to check, and then that will work. The only other tiny change we need to make to the code we've used so far is that in here, where you can see if place meeting x y + 1 obj_wall, so if there's a wall directly below us, and this is the code that allows us to jump. Because this will happen whenever there is a wall directly below us by 1 pixel, it means there's a chance that if you can picture the player jumping up through a platform and reaching the point where they're exactly 1 pixel above it, this code will happen. And as you can see, this code sets our vertical speed to either be 0 or be our jump speed, depending on whether we press jump. Now, we just need to change this to basically be exactly the same logic, but only actually set our v-speed to something if we're pressing jump, and otherwise not worry about it. Otherwise, you can have the problem where you jump up onto the platform sticks to you, and you don't carry on with your momentum. You like automatically land on it as you come up from underneath, and it can look a bit dodgy. So just quickly change this to get rid of that whole key check thing, and instead just write it at the start here and just say if key_jump. I think that's the line. Yeah, key_jump. Yeah, that's the line. So now it'll just check to see whether we've pressed that key or not, and if we have, then do the whole jumping thing. Just a minor change, really. So now, if we run the game, that should be everything. And if we jump up on here, we can see we can jump through these platforms, no problem, and we land on the top because they have no collision box at all while we're below them. So right now, none of those have a collision box. We jump up above these ones, those ones all turned on the moment we got 1 pixel above them, and as you can see, we're just walking on top of them absolutely fine. Now if I press the down arrow key, you can see I drop through it because that collision box turns off while I'm pressing the downward arrow key. Gravity works its magic, we fall down by even a fraction of a pixel, and because we're a fraction of a pixel down, our position rounds up to be 1 pixel inside of the platform, meaning that condition is no longer true where we're above it, and we are able to fall all the way through it, and it works pretty much perfectly. So yeah, I hope you enjoyed that, hope you found that useful, and I'll catch you next time. See you guys.